Okay, the first session is going to be on covenant. We actually covered the first session on what is marriage. So this is the second session in what we're doing. On Sunday, Michael said something I thought was really interesting. It's actually a thought I've had, where he talked about God as the architect of marriage. And I was sitting there listening to that, and I just actually started scribbling down some notes because I felt like that's really a great picture of this. And it actually, there's more to it than that, because I started thinking about when I was coming in from the airport on Saturday, we passed by, there's a building in town. There's actually, last night as I was looking out the window, I was seeing building after building after building. Was that the business district we were in last night coming through? It looked really impressive. But there was a building that's kind of shaped like an egg a bit. I think it's oil company somewhere downtown, if you guys are familiar with it. There's a building much like it in London as well. And I looked at that building, literally driving by on Saturday morning, and I thought, how do you come up with the idea that you can even build something like this? This doesn't seem like it can be built. Well, what happens is you have an architect. You have someone who has a vision for something beautiful and spectacular, and they know how to express it in ways that will make sure what they intend can actually be done. That's the role of an architect. An architect, they are artists as much as they are engineers. They really are people who if you ever have interacted with an architect, they're always thinking about how to make beauty out of something, turn function into beauty, make sure you anticipate all the needs. And so when God designed marriage, which is His property to design, He is the architect. He is the one who's established. First, Genesis 1 and 2 are the basic blueprints of His plan. This idea that He creates male and female and He brings them together in union, and they have a number of functions we'll talk about. But this function of being one is God's design as the architect of marriage. And so, but you don't simply have an architect involved. I'm going to say this, and it's a loose analogy, but the other two players in anything that's created of a large scale, like a big building, a beautiful building, is you need engineers and you need builders. So to build a building, you need three kinds of people. You need engineers, you need architects, you need engineers, and you need builders. My contention, without stretching the analogy too much, is that the engineers of marriage as God designed is the church. What does an engineer do? A building engineer, a structural engineer, an electrical engineer, the ones who work on buildings. What they do is they look at the plan that God has designed with people who want to build, and they help make sure that what those people build fits the design. It fits the architect's idea. So that's why the church has a prominent role in marriages, if you are a believer. Because to be in a church means that there is somebody who is looking at the design and looking at what you want to build and helping you think through how to do it and do it the way the designer wanted. It also, the function of the engineer is to make sure that what is built will last, that you don't build on faulty foundations, that you don't build with bad materials. And so that's what the church does. That's what pastoral care does. That's what you'll do. If you are doing premarital counseling, that's what you're doing. You're representing the engineering of somebody's desire. We want to have a marriage. We want to have, and maybe they got their idea for marriage from Netflix or whatever, or Friends or whatever. And so you're going to say to them, you know what, I know you want this, But this isn't the way it was designed. And if you try to do it the way it was designed using these methods, you're going to build something that won't last. So let me help you rethink what you want in light of the architect's plans so that what you build really does fit what you need most. That's the engineer's role. So in that case, then who are the builders? Whoever is getting married is a builder. A man and a woman are builders of a marriage. Hopefully they start building before. The great concern in Western culture, we talked a little bit about yesterday, is that people don't prepare for marriage, they prepare for weddings. So they go into a marriage without any idea, and I've seen many Christians do this, of what they really are doing, building. And so they're just throwing things together. There's guys building buildings all around us right now. You hear them every day. There is work going on. The question is, are they building the right way? And are they building with the right materials? The only way you'll know that is if they're following the role of the engineer who's following the role of the architect. You can't be a builder and say, oh, that architect, I don't even like the way they designed that. We're going to do it differently. Oh, the engineer says, oh, that won't work. If you're going to build what you to last, you're going to need to do that won't work. That's too much. That's too hard. That doesn't fit who I am. I want to build my marriage my way. So I'm going to, rather than doing all that, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to make it really pretty like this. I'm going to emphasize how I don't really care that much about the structure. I want to put all my effort in the outside appearance. I'm going to put all my effort in making sure when people see it, they see, wow, that's pretty. So I'm going to spend $15,000, $20,000 USD on photography for a wedding. Because I want to show on social media what a beautiful thing I've created, with no idea that you're following any kind of a plan. And people do that, and then they get married, and they realize this isn't working, and they don't go back and consult the ultimate plan, and they don't go back to the church and say, listen, what we're doing isn't working, it's falling apart. They say, well, let's just prop it up. Let's just patch it. And they patch and patch and patch, and they say, you know what? This isn't working. Well, let's open up a new wing, and let's call that having children. And we'll just focus on, we'll stop using this that much. We won't use the marriage part of the building very much. We're going to focus on the parenting, but they do the same thing. God is the architect of parenting. When God designs parenting to function a certain way, because he has a certain vision for humanity who are children, and then you have the church who is there to help people build according to God's way. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do it this way. I like this blog. I like this podcast. I like this. I like the way they're doing that. So I think our children need to be educated, and that needs to be the highest goal in life, to make sure they're educated. So I'm going to make all my investment in education. And so they do that, and they don't give attention to the spiritual well-being of the children. They don't build the children into the church, and the children end up straying and causing great difficulty. And they say, what happened? Well, it's because you had a building that you built poorly. Rather than correcting that building, you just diverted your attention to starting another building that you built the same way, apart from the architect, apart from the engineer, and now that's going to fall apart as well. And so many people I know who are Christians are looking at marriage. In the United States, for example, if you look at divorce statistics among all people, but even in the church, they spike when the youngest child is about 15 years old. Why do you think that is? Yeah. So what happens? Again, this is the States, but I think in various ways, as much as Western influence is happening, it's going to happen everywhere Western influence is. What happens in a marriage is the husband, they're married together, now they have children. Because the wife is dissatisfied with the marriage, she begins to devote her attention on the children. This is a good Christian family, right? This isn't a nominal Christian family. This is a good Christian family. They begin to devote and our marriage isn't what it should be. We don't want to point people to our marriage, but we want to be, we want to make sure people know we're great parents. And so you see them, and all their attention is focused on the children. Whose primary responsibility day in and day out is that? The man or the woman? Like, it's the woman, right? The woman is home every day with the children, and she's daily working with them. The husband, his primary responsibility, even if he's a good Christian husband, is to provide for the family and make sure you generally stay in order. So what happens with the wife in a marriage is a profound transition from wife to mother. The husband doesn't change that much. He kind of stays where he's at. And so let's say you have 3 children, and let's say they're 2 years apart, like my girls were. So you have one that's at 15 years old. So you have a 13 and 11. That mother is actively parenting. The father is basically there. He's overseeing the big picture. He's addressing issues, but his identity is primarily in the provider role. So they grow up. The first kid gets to be gets beyond what tends to happen is once a child, at least in the West, gets to be about 15 years old, listening to my parents is an option. It isn't a requirement. Parents don't understand that, but a lot of times in Western culture, and I guess increasingly other cultures, the voices in a kid's life at 15 are much stronger outside the family than there are in the family, particularly if there are cell phones involved. And so that parents don't realize they're not influencing the way they were. They're not. Their voice is not strong. They're finding there's clashing happening. There's differences of values. They're trying all the things they do to make obedience work. We'll talk about this when we talk about kids. And you can't keep piling on consequences for misbehavior. And so what they do is the mom gets frustrated and she just focuses all of her training, which is oversight, on the youngest children. But eventually that 15-year-old says, I don't need you either. And so you have a woman who got into marriage to discover that her husband didn't really think she was essential to who he was supposed to be. And he said, go over there and be essential to those people. And now those people are saying, you're not essential to me either. And the woman, both of her roles have disappeared without her even realizing it. And so she looks at her life and she says, I have no value in being a mother. I have no value in being a wife. I'm going to get a career. Not that career is anything wrong. It's not about a career. It's about why. I need an identity outside of this. And eventually that identity creates another lifestyle, and that's where you see marriages break up. Very, very common. And the husband, who's also the father, never saw it coming because he's never had to adapt. He's just stayed the same the whole time. Now, you're in Ethiopian culture. Is anything I'm saying relevant for the culture you're in or the people you think you'll pastor? Yeah. You could look at different cultures and you'll see different variations on the deviation from God's plan. This is a Western deviation that is all too common. And as people come into the church, a lot of times I think in places where you're not the dominant culture, people who are coming into your church where you are, they're having to adapt. They've already adapted to some Western values because you're building, in some sense, in a Western mode. So I think you're going to find that they're going to struggle with these things. So what we need then is to go back and say, let's give attention to the architect's idea. That's what we're doing this morning. We're giving attention to the architect's idea because we're going to have to build our own marriages that way, but we're going to also have to see, as we seek to help marriages, where have they deviated from the architect's plan. People want you to they want you to come alongside them and figure out how to patch up things that are falling apart. You're going to be saying, no, I think we can't. We may have to rip it all down and start again. We need to see what the plan tells us to do. How far away from the plan are you? In our own marriages, we want to make sure we build according to that plan. So, that's a long introduction to give you a picture of how we're going to go about this. We're going to move from architect to builder in our conversations. So, what's the primary plan for marriage? We've seen it in the way it's described in our statement of faith. But basically, it's to display God's glory in covenant union. If you want to strip it down, take Genesis 1 and 2, strip it down. It's to display God's glory in covenant union. We are created with a divine responsibility to glorify God, to image God. Sin has disrupted that, but we still retain that, not only the vestiges and the inherent base reality that we are image bearers, but we also retain the responsibility. God doesn't remove the responsibility from sinners for something He gave in creation. Jesus came to restore our capacity as image bearers, to worship God from the heart, and also to give Him glory by the way we live and the way we build. God's redeemed people glorify God in many ways. How we pray, how we sing, how we serve, how we endure struggle, how we share His good news, how we create and work and love others. Those are all ways that we glorify God. But in God's creation of humankind, He created them male and female in a specific role in image bearing. And we talked about that yesterday, so we're not going to go back into that text. And we saw, though, that He's created us to rule, to vice-regent the world as male and female. We are co-regents, co-vice-regents, best way to say it, of God's creation. We are called to procreate. We are called to multiply so that image bearers flood the earth. We don't want places in the earth where the only image bearing is the creational image bearing. Thank you. We as people image bear, and we want to do that throughout the earth. But there's a distinctive thing He gives us when He says He brings us together. The two shall become one flesh. That is distinctive for marriage. That is a particular way. Again, you never put that as more valuable than the non-married or single state. But we always have to recognize that when a marriage is created, there is a unique entity created that's meant to have a purpose. A marriage is a unique entity that's created through human decision. That's a fascinating thing. By human decision, we create something that now God recognizes that He is going to deal with as belonging to Him. If you go to Las Vegas, and this is a debatable point, and in the United States, and you have a quickie wedding, you get drunk and you go to one of those 24-hour wedding chapels that they have there, and they marry you, and you don't even know each other's names. You've created something that you're responsible for before God, because you have created something that He says belongs to Him. You may have deviated from the plan, but you've never created something that belongs to you. So in marriage, it's the one place I tell people, you can't make a decision to follow Jesus Christ. You respond to the gospel. God brings you alive. God makes you aware of your sin. God makes you aware of the Savior. God brings you to Him. When I came to Christ in college, I was not looking for God up till the very second that I received Jesus Christ as my Savior. I did not believe in Jesus Christ until He showed Himself to me in a way that I knew I now had a responsibility to respond. I had no theological debate over God. I had no argument with God's right to control my life. I was an atheist at 3:42 a.m. on February 2nd, 1981. I was a child of God at 3:43 a.m., February 2nd, 1981. I did no choosing other than to respond to the one who called me. Yes, Lord, I will follow. That was the extent of my choosing. I wouldn't have done that if it had not been for God's from before all time electing me and then working all things together for that moment to bring me to life in Christ. But marriage that God recognizes as a state that He has created is a choice we can make. We can choose poorly in marriage. We can. It's the biggest mistake we can make in terms of our identity in this world before God. Who I choose to marry. We can't really even choose to have children or not. We can desire or not desire. Children come because God brings them. Marriage is the choice we make. It is the most profound choice. I would say the only other choice you could put there is the choice, the self-choice to end your life. That's how significant it is. And so we have to see the importance of God's ownership of marriage. And it means that we are going to have to look at what is created, and that is a covenant. A covenant is simply, well, actually, we're going to look at Ephesians 5, and we're going to kind of draw from there. So you probably have it printed in your text. If you want to pull it up, you can do that as well. This is Ephesians 5, probably the most quoted text in relating to marriage. But like I tried to show yesterday, it is not. Everything you need to know about marriage is not found in Ephesians 5. Paul says, 22, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one hated his flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. You guys know this. That's from Genesis. It's also affirmed by Jesus in Matthew 19. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that refers to Christ and the church. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Before I go on, as I'm reading this text, here's just an idea that came to me, and I'm going to share it because it just feels like it's Ephesians 5 in context. Paul is from 4 on. He's turned his attention to the church and relationships in the church, and he brings in down to submission to one another. It's all in the context of how do we relate to one another in the various ways in which we're called to relate. So Ephesians 21 talks about submit to one another in reverence to Christ. Then he says wives should submit to husbands. Now, we're going to talk about this idea of submission. We're going to talk about this idea of roles. But what I would encourage you to do when you read this text, when this text gets debated, when this text gets gets argued over, when people say, this is why I don't believe I want to do what the Bible says, is because they take that one, wives, submit to your husbands, and they make that what the text is about. But I would encourage you to consider it this way, that what Paul is doing, and he does it straight through Ephesians 5 into Ephesians 6 when he talks about families, he's drilling down. And everything he says about one proceeds on. But the idea is he's going deeper. So he says, if you watch the flow of this section, it starts with wives doing a straightforward thing, submit to your husbands. Then he goes to husbands, and then he attaches to the husbands deeper and deeper implications about the way a marriage is meant to work, what it's meant to be. So we never want to stop and park at wives, submit to your husbands. We want to move through there to the deeper realities. A man shall breathe, and what Paul's doing here in an amazing way, as we saw yesterday, is he's basically taking from Genesis to Revelation and bringing it all together in one place. He brings Genesis in, the covenant. And then he also brings the end, which is Christ and his church, the ultimate fulfillment. So it'll help us all in teaching on this, in counseling on this, to not let couples get hung up on submission issues. You don't build submission from 22. You build submission from the whole text and the depth of marriage as God's designed it, up to, therefore, here's how it should work. Here's how it's meant to work. I want to say that because you're going to find that's a big issue with people. So really the center of the text is, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that refers to Christ and the church. Two becoming one flesh is covenant language. A marriage is not a temporary partnership. It's not legalized cohabitation. When we enter into marriage, we accept a definition and purpose for the relationship that's not of our own choosing. There's an architect of it. The blessing of the gift of marriage is contingent on our right understanding of it and our right behavior in it. In other words, the blessing of marriage is contingent on whether, as we build, we allow the engineering arm of the church to help us build something that then can be a repository for the blessing of God. If you don't do that, God will oppose your marriage. And this happens with a lot of couples in counseling. They come in and they talk about all the issues they have, and they want you to talk about communication. Everybody wants to talk about communication. We just need better communication. No, you need to understand that God is opposing you because you're building in contrary to what He wants you to do. He's never going to bless building something that isn't consistent with what He's designed. You're experiencing that on a daily basis. You can't. The issue with a lot of marriage conflicts is because people can't hide from their failure to obey God. Every time they fail to obey God in the way they love each other, the way they speak, the way they relate, the way they deal with their own selfishness, somebody else lets them know that. There's a saying called a canary in the cave. You guys familiar with that? In mining in the States, in deep ground mining, the danger is carbon monoxide and people dying of carbon monoxide. And so what they used to do is they put small birds, canaries, in cages down at the bottom of the caves. And everybody keeps an idea on that canary. When the canary's dead, it's time to get out. That was the idea. You know, if the canary dies, he's going to die before I do. But if he's dead, that means the air isn't safe. And so people don't realize, but what happens in the marriage is the other person is the canary in the cage. They're telling you this isn't working. You can't hide from it. And so, and people coming for counseling are going to want you to revive the canary. They're going to want you to get rid of the canary. They want you to fix the canary so the canary, actually, rather than dying, actually sings praises to you. That's not the way it works. And so we're going to find if we don't build according to God's plan, you're not going to receive God's blessing in your day-to-day life in your marriage. So this is a covenant. God has a covenant in mind. Why we know it's a covenant is because of one clear word. It's the word this. It's the word, therefore a man shall leave, and the two shall become. That language is covenant language. That language is command language. That language does not leave open other options. In legal systems, there's a vast difference between the word will and the word shall. When a contract says, this party will do this, that indicates in most legal concepts that the intention of the person is to do this. When the contract says shall, that means the person must do this. I don't know if it'll show up if you guys do a lease for this building that you're looking at, but if the contract says the church will maintain the premises in a clean and orderly way. There may be times where you have a late night gathering and you don't have a chance to clean it up, and they can't kick you out for that. They can't end the lease for that. But if it says you shall at all times maintain security in this sort of way, and you fail to do that, the lease can be ended. That shall has weight, that will doesn't. Most legal systems, that's the way it's designed. So in the Bible, when you see the word shall, it's command language. And so this is in the form of command. Man shall do this. So when you, by God's design, He has created a covenant, a binding agreement to do things God's way. So there's no such thing as a Christian marriage in a sense any more than there's a secular marriage or a Muslim marriage or a Hindu marriage, because marriage is not a cultural convention. There's only God's design for marriage. So the idea, because it's rooted in Genesis 1 and 2, it is before the fall. We talked about that. So that means that it isn't just this is the way Christians do marriage. God blesses marriage in His redemptive ways if it's done according to His way. And so it's not subject to different religious understandings. That affects dramatically if you are pastoring people in a non-Christian context. And their marriage has been built in a non-Christian way. You're going to be very limited to help them keep their marriage going the way they initially designed it. That's the point. It's very important because people come to you and they want to get married and you realize they have no idea what a biblical view of marriage is. It's going to affect how you're willing to partner, to participate with them. There may be people in your church you can't participate in the wedding. You can't stop them from being married. There's no right of the church to deny marriage other than the exception clauses we looked at, where it's because there's a divorce, there's an adultery issue involved. But if two people come and they're doing it all the wrong way, the church cannot prevent that. The church may not participate in that, and I've done that before people. I can't stop you from getting married, but I know you can't get married in the church. We can't do that. We can't. What will happen is here's very common in the States. Somebody's in the church, and they start dating somebody outside the church, and that person is maybe nominal at best. There's no indication they're following Christ. The person, because they're in a relationship, says, "Sure, I like Jesus. I love Jesus, and yeah, I'm a Christian. That's how I approached it when, I had this girl I wanted to date. If I need to be a Christian, sure, I'll be that too. And so you recognize this may not be an equally yoked marriage. This marriage could be between a believer and an unbeliever, but the other person, this happens a lot, they just close their eyes to all the signs that this person isn't going to follow Jesus. No, they're a great person. They come to church. Listen, they're coming to church. That's what you need, right? And so you might find when they want to can we get married in the church? Why do they want to get married in the church? Why would they want to get married in the church if they haven't been building their relationship in the church? What would be some reasons? To get approval. To get validation that the church says what they're doing is okay. And as a pastor, I may not be able to, as an engineer, validate what they're trying to build. I look at the materials they're using, I look at the methods they're using, and I say, I can't stamp this as okay. You can build it all you want, but you can't. And I have to accept it unless there's sin in the way they do it. Someone can't be married. They're going to end up in my church having started a marriage without God's. And I'm going to have to help them for the rest of the time. That's a reality you face sometimes. So, the most important thing is the covenant. Let's jump down. How does a marriage come together? And we see this when he says, a man will leave his father and mother, hold fast to his life, and become one. So there's three aspects of this idea of the covenant working itself out. There's leaving, there is holding fast, as I think it says in the ESV, and there is becoming one. What are we talking about there? Leaving, obviously in the text is, and in the culture of the time, is you don't set up something that's a subset of the family. This isn't, this is a marriage, but it really belongs within the context of a biological or cultural family. Marriage sets up its own covenant. It isn't bound to the covenant of somebody else. It isn't bound to our position as children of another covenant. So we're called to leave. The practical reality is that we now stand before the Lord as something apart from our families. Culturally, depending on your culture, in various parts of the world, that's very different. I have a lot of friends who are second generation Chinese. This is a very hard thing in Chinese culture because family is so strong, rigidly strong, and you don't bring your marriage outside of the family. It stays within. So Christians are all the time creating challenges. It creates challenges in Chinese churches because it tends to break the first generation is still operating the old system. The new generation, it isn't just westernization. It's I want to build a family that is not beholden to my existing family. So that's what leaving is. I think, frankly, it can be extended also to what else do you need to leave in order to be married? What about singleness needs to be left? Is it? Well, maybe the way you relate to friends, right? Yeah, you don't want to necessarily just kick off your friends, but see you guys, you're done. I'm writing you off. It's like out of my social media. But yeah, you're certainly your relation, the way you relate, the idea that you can just go hang out whenever you want without regard to your spouse, you have to leave. That's an excellent one. What else? Yeah, day one, loss of privacy. That's really hard. You start to realize all the habits that you don't think about, somebody else thinks are very weird. Like, why do you do that? Why don't you do this instead? I don't even know I'm doing that. So yeah, all the habits. How you sleep, right, is a huge thing. Next, when you have somebody else there trying to exercise their customary habits. So you have two people in the bed exercising customary habits of sleep that don't work well. You end up with your hand on their face or whatever. So that's a practical one, yeah. So you have to recognize I've got to adapt. What about career? What about career? You guys are all pursuing ministry, but think about friends that you have who are in careers. So, example would be you're in a corporation and your next step up in the corporation requires you to leave and take your family. Just take your wife. Let's say you don't have kids yet. To a place where there's no church that you're aware of. But my job requires this. Or my job requires 2 weeks a month international travel. Now, it could be doable, but you can't simply say, this is a wonderful opportunity, I'm going to go do it. Right? There's another person. There's a covenant you're having to tend to for anything. So leaving is a much more complex thing than simply saying, I'm moving out from under my parents. It's whatever keeps me from being able to commit to that covenant, I need to leave, at least be willing to leave outside. Hobbies. We were talking about hiking for, Esaias, it's a wonderful thing. That would change, unless you have a fellow hiker or someone who has equally something they enjoy once a year doing. So if you have a wife, for example, let's say you're at Esaias, and we're not going to say what kind of wife he's going to have, but his wife says, you know what, I need 1 month a year to write a book. So, and I need to be able to write a book without constantly, I need the space. So you could say, okay, 1 month a year, you're going to go hike, I'm going to write a book. And you agree to it and do it, no problem. But you, in the absence of that, you couldn't say as the wife or the husband, as a writer, you know what, I just need you out of the house for a month so I can write a book. You can come in at 11 o'clock at night, but you need to leave by 6 a.m. because I'm writing. So, or I'm going to retreat to a retreat to write. So that's leaving. Then there is holding fast. The King James Version calls it cleaving. The classic is leave, cleave, and become one. Cleaving, the idea behind it, the concept behind cleaving is twofold. It is pursuing, and then once you capture, holding fast to, holding on to. It involves both, right? In Western culture, there is a great emphasis on the pursuit. Most dating relationships are pursuit-driven. I want something that you have, and I'm going to pursue it till I get it. The problem is it's pursuit without an equal commitment to hold fast. Well, once I have you, we're in this. So that's why that's one of the reasons the cultural view of dating in the West is so problematic, because it's all about pursuit. It's all about it's a way to conquer, and women do the same thing in different ways. They're pursuing. We don't, but it's the idea is in my marriage, I want my wife, and the husband should feel the same way. I want my wife that I am always moving toward her. I am always pursuing you. I'm never treating you like this. I'm never treating you like you're a separate part. Now that I've got you, you're over here, and I need you to be this for me. No, I'm pursuing you. I want my relationship to be toward you one of constantly leaning toward you. But I also hold fast. I am not going anywhere. I am here. Because the vows are a unilateral commitment to the marriage. They're not a negotiated commitment. They're not, if you do this, I will do this. They are unilateral. That means that I vow this, no matter what you do, this is what I vow. Now, the biblical exceptions come into play, but you don't have to, for example, be healthy for the rest of your life for me to be committed to you. If you end up, you guys know, ever hear of B.B. Warfield? Okay, so wonderful. Do you know Warfield's story? So Warfield was a young man, brilliant, moving up in the academic world. He married a wonderful woman. They took a honeymoon in the Alps somewhere. Something happened, and it's never been quite clear what happened. There was a storm, and that storm triggered something in his wife where she lived with constant fear in her life. They came back, and she was a changed person. Who he knew her to be, she wasn't anymore. And she couldn't go more than a mile or so from her home for the rest of her life. It's never clear from the stories about it, and Warfield didn't expound upon it, how much of it was physical and how much it was mental, emotional. But Warfield changed everything. He had a great career. He said, I'll take a position at Princeton. And from that moment on, he was never in his life more than an hour away from his home. He never traveled for ministry. He was always home at night until she passed away. He cleaved. He held. I will adapt my life to you. It is extraordinarily difficult to do. I'm walking with some couples now where there's physical issues that have come into play. And these are young couples. These are not older couples. It always happens in older couples. In older couples, you're always faced with that. Younger couples, it's more traumatic. Or there's a miscarriage, or there's a trauma of some sort, or there's a significant crisis that occurs, and it affects the marriage. That's when the holding fast matters. It's not hard to stay together when things are going well. This commitment is when things aren't going well, I'm committed to the marriage. And one of the things I try to help people do in counseling is that your job is never committed primarily to the other person. You can't be the savior. You're committed to the marriage because that's what got created when you said I do. When you affirmed your vows, you created something. And so a lot of times when I'm helping people in counseling, what I'm trying to do is I'm saying it's not about you guys trying to fix each other. It's about working on this thing that you've created that God is now trying to work through to sanctify you. So cleaving, becoming one, and that means we are together. You want that sense that my life is open to you, that I'm vulnerable, that there is no clear definition of where my interests end and your interests begin. Your interests are my interests. What matters to you matters to me. Again, it all has to inform our understanding of roles, because a lot of times the misunderstanding of roles has to do with the fact that a man sort of sees his leadership as if it's irrelevant to his wife's interests. He's just a leader. I'm leading the home. Well, no, your leadership matters nothing if it isn't attentive to the wife's interests. That's why Paul uses Jesus as the analogy. The way Jesus loved the church, gave himself up for her. Any leadership, we'll talk about this when we talk about roles, any leadership must look like a giving myself up for you. So, its ultimate purpose, though, is to display the marriage. It's all about, we're trying to be a picture. I want my marriage. I want when people encounter Jill and I together, that they sense the grace of God in ways that they don't sense it from me alone. I think if Jill were here, you would say, oh, I get it. The things that I appreciate about Andy, I know where they come from. They don't come from him. They come from the effect of her on him. I think you would, when I come here and I interact with you guys, you're getting half of me. You're not getting even the best part of me. And I think that's a bit what it's supposed to be like. If you see us together, and not that you won't see us argue, but if you see us together, we've done some marriage retreats recently, and for different churches, and we do it together. Even though she doesn't have a prominent role because she doesn't like to teach, every situation, your teaching was fine. You know, that's what I get. Your teaching was fine. Your example was compelling. It was not my example. It's not her example. People are not saying, well, that's a beautiful picture of godly womanhood. Oh, that's a beautiful picture of biblical masculinity. What they're saying is, you two together display something for me that I really love seeing. That's what we want to do. That's what we want.